These guys were, in the pantheon of trivia. Both of these guys were way better than I was. But I can hold my own. But these guys were like head and shoulders above everybody. So the one guy turns to the other guy and says, I've got a baseball trivia question for you. He says, okay, go ahead. So he says, the only man to die on a baseball field. His name was Ray Chapman. Okay? So the one guy says to the other guy, who threw the pitch? So the guy from the Rocky Mountain News says, that's the easiest question known to man. The man who threw the pitch, his name was Carl Mays. Oh, and so I'm thinking, I'm like, wow, that's two obscure names you don't really hear that often, right? And how often does somebody say the only man ever to die on a baseball field? Ray Chapman hit in the head by pitcher Carl Mays. So the guy who got the first trivia question right turns to the second guy and says, now, let's see how smart you are. Who pinch ran for Carl Mays? Because if you're hit by the pitch, you get first base. Well, the guy dies. So who pinch runs for Ray Chapman? And so the one guy was like, I don't know. That's the greatest sports baseball trivia question I've ever heard. So I'm thinking to myself, that's a pretty morbid question. Who pinch ran for the guy who died on the baseball field? So the one guy, the smartest man in the world, we dubbed him that night because he knew the answer to this. He says, the man's name is Harry August Lunte. And it was like, well, we'll never, ever, that's the greatest trivia question of all time. Okay, so fast forward. So now we're talking maybe 10 years, 12 years, 15 years later. And I'm on the radio. And I'm really kind of embarrassed to say this, but I had to give away some type of trivia, something on the air. And either I didn't want to do it, or I forget the circumstances as to why I didn't want anybody to get the answer to the question, right? Because I don't know. I forget. They wanted me to go somewhere, and I didn't want to do it, or I was upset with the boss. I forget why I didn't want anybody to get the answer to the question. So I go on the air, and I say, hey, I've got 2 tickets to this, or I have to go meet you for lunch, or hey, anybody want? And I forget what it was. But I didn't want anybody to win. So I said, if you can answer this trivia question, I will, give you this prize. So I said, the only man to ever die in a baseball field is Ray Chapman. The pitcher was Carl Mays. If anybody can tell me who pinch ran for Ray Chapman, I will give you whatever it was. The tickets, I'll meet you for lunch or for whatever I was supposed to do. So I sit back and I'm like, they're never going to get this one. So I come back from the break. I go on the air. Bob, you're on line 2. What's your answer? He says, Harry August Lunte. So I was like, wait, hold on a second. Wait a minute. How do you know that Harry August Lunte was the man who pinch ran for the only man in the history of baseball who died on the baseball field? So the guy says, easy. He's my grandfather. He's buried in Bell Fountain Cemetery. No way. He goes, oh, yeah, I have all his baseball stuff. I have his baseball card. I have his glove. I have all this stuff. And it turns out Harry August Lunte was born in St. Louis, died in St. Louis, and is buried at a cemetery, St. John Cemetery in Bell Fountain, Neighbors. So I love that story. So so in my weaselness, I got weaseled, right? In my me being a nudge, I got my comeuppance. That is the greatest. I love that story. But that just shows you the power of radio. It shows you how great St. Louis is. That, the most obscure. So here you have the answer to the world's greatest arguably the world's greatest baseball trivia question, and it has a St. Louis connection. Meanwhile, I think Ray Chapman and Harry August Lunte played for the Cleveland Indians. So it had nothing to do with St. Louis at all. And actually, that's one of the reasons why they then started wearing helmets. because the guy got hit in the head and then ultimately died. So there you go. There's my story for the day. When we come back, there is a real possibility that a legitimate third-party candidate just announced an independent run, which would cause all sorts of problems for Donald Trump. We'll tell you who it is, and we'll explain. Next, 9:47 here, Big 550 KTRS. Can I tell you about my friends at ARCA? I've known Percy and the family, the men